I'm Indy and Othais. Welcome to a Great War special episode about Romanian rifles and pistols from the First World War.
Now, Romania, very interestingly, and Indy can fill us in more about this at some point, they had a populace that was more towards the Entente and a government, or rather a monarchy, that was more towards the German and Austro-Hungarian side of things. So they would contract with Austria-Hungary. And to that effect, they would adopt the Romanian Mannlicher 1893, which is a beautiful, beautiful rifle that is derived from that earlier Gewehr 1888 that we saw in Germany. Now, what happened with that is, if you remember that gun, and if not, you can turn back to that previous episode. That gun was adapted from the Mauser 71, now with front-locking lugs. It borrowed the Mannlicher clip feed system, and then end-block clip feed system, where the entire packet is inserted into the gun. And then it had a barrel jacket. Open bottom mag was a problem. That's still here in this gun. Well, that gun, because Germany sort of walked with the technology of the clip, ended up being produced back at Steyr. Otto Schönauer would work on this gun, and later we'll see his name placed on the next evolution of this. Otto Schönauer actually reworked this into a tighter military rifle. He got rid of the barrel jacket, he tightened up the fittings, he played with the ejector system to make it a little cleaner, and also the clip system was modified to make it a little more reliable and to feed both top and bottom. Remember with the 1895s that we talked about, you had to feed them in one way? Well, that was because of the rimmed ammo. The 1888 didn't care, the German, because it had rimless ammo. It could feed top or bottom, didn't matter. Well, they went back and they made sure that it could feed top or bottom with rimmed ammo. So this is a rimmed 6.5 millimeter cartridge. This is one of those cartridges that's designed to shoot light, long, and flat so that you hit what you're pointing at longer ranges. We've done an explanation of point blank before. But this export Mannlicher, essentially, not the Mannlicher straight pulls actually designed by Mannlicher, but rather a gun manufactured by Steyr, and history is sort of named a Mannlicher, even though it's Mauser, Schlegelmilch, and Schönauer that really went into developing this gun. This is the gun that Romania ultimately adopts, and they adopt it at a time that was really tumultuous for them. Indy, did you want to talk about that at all, as a matter of fact? Because this gun showed up 1892, 1893, and that's right when you really wouldn't expect them to be buying from Austria-Hungary.
Well, you would expect the government to be buying from Austria-Hungary, but perhaps not the general populace, because there was an issue just that year in Transylvania, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had an ethnic Romanian population of 54%. The Romanian party there petitioned Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph for equal rights among the other ethnic minorities of the empire, and that petition was not even read, and the leaders of that party who had written the petition were arrested and spent up to 5 years in prison. Now, King Carol of Romania, he was Prussian by birth, so he, of course, had affinity for what we would call the Central Powers today. But more and more, going through then and up towards the war, the public, the Romanian public, was more and more Francophile. So you had this little dichotomy between him and his populace. But 1892 was a very tumultuous time. So it's very interesting that this actually was coming out just then. Now, we did talk in our Romanian uniform special a little bit about they were ordering stuff from Steyr. So it's nice that you mentioned that so we can drill that into people's heads. But of course, public opinion was not ordering the weapons. It was, in fact, the political elite and the rulers and the king who were ordering the weapons. So it made sense to order them from neighboring Austria-Hungary, in spite of what was going on politically with the ethnic minorities.
Yeah, that would actually prove to be a very poor decision, as we know in hindsight, because they would order these guns, and by the way, Romania peacetime was not like the largest army there was, and so, as you know, everybody that gets involved in the Great War suddenly balloons, you know, triple, quintuple, your armies are expanding so rapidly, and you're pulling old guns from reserves, and you really have to be able to bring in new arms. Well, Romania and Greece are both going to suffer this one tricky little problem, which is that they turn their guns on the men they bought them from. And so they weren't really able to buy any more. And that created logistical nightmares. I mean, you have a 6.5 millimeter rimmed cartridge for this gun, beautiful as it may be. And now you have to get more ammo. Yes, you have domestic production. It cannot keep up. You're barely able to put out 1 cartridge per rifle in the country per day once you're in the thick of the war. You also have to be able to replace and repair these. And again, you have no outside supplier because you're firing on him. And as a matter of fact, you're going to see guns like this that were due to be delivered being seized by Austria-Hungary and used against the people they were meant to be issued to. So, overall, it's not a very good idea to go to war with your arms supplier. But while we have the opportunity, let me go ahead and get a closer look at this for you guys so you can see some of the details that went into this. So if I place her down and we zoom in, we can see it really does favor that earlier Gewehr 1888. We have a split receiver, so our bolt handle passes through the receiver and then locks down. We have front locking lugs. The big changeover on these guys is that they have a ejector set down up under the bolt. That's something specifically that the Romanians asked for. They did not like Schönauer's ejector that we're going to see on another rifle. They also asked for this reinforcing rib over the model 1892. We'll get into that in more detail when we do our video. It's a fairly long rifle, and we have our stacking rod, our cleaning rod. We have our bayonet side mounted, and then look, moving back up, obviously we have our beautifully long range sight for our flat shooting cartridge. Again though, this is still fairly optimistic, and we've talked about volley fire and things like that before. Now this did use a flippable clip, which means 5 rounds that could be tipped either way. I do not have an original Romanian with me. As a matter of fact, I'll probably end up using a Dutch one because the same ammunition and the same general configuration with some differences to the sights and wood were used by the Dutch. Now, again, super lucky to borrow this one. It's in about as mint condition as you can get, and these things are hard to find in any condition. But if we zoom out, I can show you that they were not entirely dependent on just this, because I mean, again, we've seen this in World War I. We're pushing 50 inches every time we do any of these long guns. Well, if you're on horseback, that ain't gonna work. So, the Romanian Mannlicher also came in one of the cutest little carbine configurations you're gonna see. This is extremely light, extremely handy, and again, very smooth operation. And if we zoom in on this one, we can actually see that we do have a Royal Cipher over the top of the chamber. Now, the earliest ones did not, but as the contracts progressed, you see more and more of these getting marked properly for Romania. These same guns, by the way, I'll just let you guys get a look at it while I'm talking. These same style of guns are also going to be purchased by Portugal in smaller numbers, and they'll be around for the war for Portugal, but really not significantly.
Well, what kind of numbers are we looking at for these, for the mounted people? What kind of numbers are we looking at for that with Romania?
Yeah, we're looking at, and I'm trying to go off my memory, but I believe rifles and carbines combined, you're looking at something like 430,000-ish, if my memory serves. I'm trying to go off of pure memory there. I believe the fielded army of Romania got somewhere in the 800,000s. Now, that's not direct combat. Direct combat, they only ended up 50, 60,000 rifles short. That's not good for direct combat to be 50,000 rifles short. But, yeah, and then again, you also have to be able to issue, you don't always know who's in direct combat, so you got to issue your rifles pretty broadly. It honestly created a huge mess. As a matter of fact, post-war, the bulk of what they were fighting with in that sort of 1919 war with Bulgaria, you're really looking at like French Berthiers. That's really what's being fielded because these have been almost completely consumed. Now, they would sort of trickle back and forth in the post-war arms market, but I don't even know where the glut happened, but somewhere along the line, most of them appear to have been destroyed because these are extremely uncommon anywhere in the world. But that's really it for a specifically Romanian rifle. Again, French equipment, there's other stuff to talk about there, but you guys already have an episode about that kind of thing, and we're looking to talk about what's unique to a specific country. So, if you're ready, or if there's no questions, we can move into the Romanian handgun du jour that is absolutely fascinating, or we can take a couple questions.
Let's go to what the kids on the street have been waiting for, Romanian handguns.
All right, so the primary handgun of Romania at this time was actually the Steyr Hahn, which we've already talked about, another Austrian design. Now, they also, before that, and this will tell you sort of the flip-flop of Romanian politics, before that they had that French 1892 revolver, which they named the 1896, with very minor changes because they were bought from a different place. But basically the French 1892 revolver we've already talked about. This guy, those were the standard. But, like we saw with the Romanian rifles, those quickly ran out. And so they got desperate. And when I say desperate, I mean it, because they would adopt a Spanish-made revolver that is generally known in the collector's market as the MLE 1915. Now this one is particularly rough. It's just what I had on hand to be able to talk about this episode. We're looking for a better example as we speak. But this is honestly, in its best condition, not a gun that I would want to fire. As a matter of fact, there will probably be no firing demo for this episode on this gun unless we manage to work some real magic. Now if we zoom in, we can see why. So this is a copy of a Belgian design that is known as the Perfection. Now this is out of like the Bayard Piper family. The big difference on this gun is that to open the cylinder, it has a crane lock here, and then we're out. Okay, now this is extremely rough, and they would have been in better finish than this new, don't get me wrong, but the metal would still be particularly poor quality. As you can see, this particular one at some point in its life was either rechambered or we don't completely understand the cartridge of these. There's really not a ton of information out there. I am working on observed notes and a little bit of inventory information that people have been kind enough to gift me, and we're still trying to sort out all the details of the story of this particularly odd gun. It's been misunderstood for a number of years. I will say, from what we can see, it's marked AE. The best guess is that's Antonio Oresti, who also produced revolvers for France. And you're going to see them in the handgun market too. All these Spanish clones that we've been talking about. This is the poorest quality one. The story as we understand it now is that they were offered to France and the design appears to have come out of France. Now, I did say it's a clone of a Belgian design, but there are signs of a French commercial company trying to make a version of the French 1892 with this particular crane unlock, and the rest of it looks like a French 1892. It may be that that was sent over to Spain. It may be that they're totally unrelated, still sorting it out. But they were offered to the French. The French took one look and said, heck no, we're not that desperate. The Romanians took a look and said, we are absolutely that desperate.
Now, when was this? When were these offered to? When was Romania taking shipments of these?
The gun comes from about 1915. When they were actually received is hard to say. Probably around 1916, though, from when we see other Spanish revolvers making it into the Romanian market. They would also adopt a top break design that we're going to discuss more when we get over to the Russian side of things, sort of, and then there's going to be a lot more detail on our channel. It's just that we can't get that far into the weeds on this show. So like I said, we have our crane release, which is a little unusual on a revolver. We also have a manual safety so that you cannot cock that hammer back or pull the trigger, which again, unusual on a revolver, except for, well, we talked about Germany. And then the other thing with this gun that's very unique, and this one particularly has suffered from it, is we actually have a set screw for the barrel here, which implies that this is a softer steel or maybe iron frame, and that you cannot torque the barrel down in order to get a tight seal on that barrel when you're assembling it. So in other words, the stress required to set the barrel to be fireable is probably enough to crack either the frame or the barrel. And given the condition of these guns over time, I would say they are definitely mild steel or maybe even iron. I really haven't sat down and super examined this. But there's a set screw that keeps the barrel in place, unlike anything else that we've seen. And so this particular one's stripped out, so the barrel is just completely free spinning because it doesn't have any torque on its own whatsoever. Post-war, you have this sort of market collapse with Spain because they've been building these things for the war and it's really become part of the economy in that region. And so you see a lot of these turn to being marketed in the US, and that which was not necessarily bought is re-reamed. This particular one, the lanyard ring's been filled, it's been converted to 38. It looks like it never actually made it to Romania, unless there's something we don't quite understand about these, because a number have turned up in 38 with their lanyard rings. But in general, it's just a sign, despite the lack of hard research on these just yet, it's a sign of how bad the situation was for a country like that they're accepting something like this that is really made of poorer metal and is much poorer quality than anything on the market. And it's just because at that time it would chamber the 8mm ordnance cartridge. Now keep an eye on our channel because I'm doing a lot more research on these. I've been asking a lot of questions of people that have them, and I'm slowly making my way through some examples. We're going to piece together the story as best we can. This is probably one of the least understood things that we're going to try to include in our show. So if anything is not completely correct, I apologize. This one's in active research. by everybody, not just me. I don't know of anybody that's an expert in these.
If you'd like to learn more about the weapons we talked about today, you can click right here to go to Othais' channel C&Rsenal, where you will subscribe, and you will also learn more about all those fascinating weapons. See you next time.